Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this IET Surrey webinar. And I'm the host for this evening's session. My name is Nigel Ward. This evening's talk is going to be a very interesting one about aerial mapping and various applications of that. We're very fortunate to have one of the experts in that field who happens to be local to us here in Surrey. So the question really to set things off is, what's aerial mapping all about? And obviously photography is a very important part of that, which is quite a challenging thing, particularly if you're in the UK. And if you're in Surrey this evening, it's a reasonably bright day, but most of the days of the year in the UK have some weather challenges or other. So that's going to be an interesting aspect of the talk that we'll hear about. So today we have, to tell us all about that, David Philpott, who is project manager with Get Mapping PLC. And he's got quite a heritage in mapping, not only from the point of view of project managing, but also flying in the aeroplanes and taking the photographs himself. So that extends to various governmental projects for the Scottish government, the Danish and the Dutch governments. If you have any questions while you're listening to today's talk, then you can submit them using the Q&A facility built into Zoom. So if you look somewhere down roughly about here, if you're using the browser version or the Zoom app, you'll find a Q&A button whereupon you can enter your questions. We have a very good audience today, not only from in the UK but around the world, and we will try to get through as many questions as we can at the end of the presentation, so do keep them coming as you hear the talk. We may not be able to get to precisely your question, but we'll try and summarize as many of those as we possibly can during the time available. So without further ado, I'd like to call upon David Philpott to give us his talk.
Right, good evening everyone. Hopefully you can see my title screen. Maybe if Nigel can confirm that, or Colin.
Yep, absolutely.
Good, okay. Firstly, good evening. Thank you Nigel and the IET team for inviting me on to talk tonight. So it's quite a broad subject, so quite a lot of content, so I'm going to whiz through it in about 50 minutes, and I'm happy to take questions afterwards. Okay, so what is aerial mapping? So aerial mapping is the collection of information from an airborne platform, most notably aerial photography. Yes, a snapshot of Earth at a particular instant in time, and contains mass data and can be interpreted for a range of purposes. So it's not just aerial photography. There's many platforms that can be used, but for the purposes of this talk, I'm going to principally talk about aerial photography. So we can also collect it from aircraft, we can collect it from helicopters, you can use UAVs and drones, increasingly so. And of course, there's also satellites as well. And again, really, for the purposes of this talk, we are going to be talking about the collection of aerial photography using aircraft, and this is the capture of nationwide data sets. So I've got a few slides on the history. So obviously, historical aerial photography has been around really since as long as people have taken to the air. So the oldest surviving aerial photograph dates back to 1860, captured from a balloon. And yeah, that's 45 years before the Wright brothers' first powered flight. Moving onwards, the photography really took off in earnest, as many things do in technology, with military applications, and particularly in the First World War. There's extensive use of aerial photography for surveillance techniques, in identifying enemy positions and troop movements. And then further on, even more usage of it in World War II. There's a lot of imagery that exists from that time. And then I haven't got a slide of it, but just after the Second World War, there was a huge program between 1945 and 1947 by the RAF of doing an extensive aerial photographic survey just after the war. So moving on, another 50 years, and to Get Mapping. So Get Mapping was founded in the late 1990s, and there was a purpose. So the purpose was to create the first national aerial photographic data set, which was called the Millennium Map. And this was done speculatively. So the idea was to create this map and sell it. And this was, if you think back to the late 1990s, before Google or anything else was around, so it was quite unique. It was captured over a couple of years with analog cameras, and sold to the public, sold to business, and it was very successful. And then times change, and technology changes, and digital cameras were starting to be manufactured in the early 2000s, and Get Mapping have always been an early adopter of new technology. And we purchased our first large format digital survey camera in 2004, which I think was number 10 in the Ultracam line. It was a very early adoption of that technology. And we started to repeat the Millennium Map in digital in 2004. We have a production team in South Africa called Geosense, and Get Mapping and Geosense merged. So the flight operations, the IT and the technology side of the business merged with the production side of the business. And we've got about 50 staff across sites in the UK and South Africa. So we're a leading supplier of aerial photography and derived data sets to the UK market. And we're also pioneers of online delivery. So a long time ago, we have been streaming data over the web, making data available to sell over the web. So I had a web shop online for over 15 years. And we're a long-term OS partner, creating data for them and also reselling their data sets to our customers alongside our photography. As I mentioned, most of this talk is about capturing mass data sets. So the bread and butter of what we do is updating national data sets. So we've got contracts with Scottish Government for updating the aerial photography for Scotland, and then we also got one for the UK Government, which we still hold, which is updating photography of the whole of Great Britain. We've been a long-term OS imagery supplier. They've got their own imagery capture programs, and that's the main purpose of that is to update their topographical mapping. And we've also done projects in the Netherlands, and we've also sold the data to the likes of Google, Bing, Apple, and also the large utility companies. So we've done, over the last 20 years, we have captured millions of square kilometers of data. So we are one of the leading, if not the leading, company for mass data capture in the UK. So the first part of the presentation is about how do we go about capturing aerial photography. So I've got a slide first to show the evolution of technology. So we think back to the Millennium Map, we were using analog equipment. So film scanners, large rolls of film, and then had to be scanned on large flatbed scanners. So everything changed with digital technology, and the trend of digital technology since the early 2000s up until now has been increased footprints on the ground. So improved CCDs, larger footprints on the ground means less flying time and higher flying heights. So you can capture more data in a shorter space of time, which, as we're going to see, is very important in the United Kingdom, with its own specific conditions for doing aerial survey. So yeah, trend is for larger footprints on the cameras, less flying, and much more improved CCD technology. And as you can see, this illustrates the change. So 2003, for a similar resolution, each photograph would cover 1.3 square kilometers on the ground. And that's increased to 7 square kilometers in 2018. It's a huge difference. And when we're talking about mass capture of national data sets, if you're reducing your flying time, you can increase your update cycle. So when we started this, it took us 3 years to capture the Millennium Map, and now we're looking at capturing and updating the whole country on a 3-year update cycle repeatedly. And to do this, you do need to absolutely maximize your flying opportunities in the UK, especially in UK weather conditions. So it's critical to get the most efficient capture that you can, and the technology is helping that. So these are the cameras. We use Ultracams, which are the market-leading large format digital camera. So we've got 2 of them with different lenses. One which captures at 19,000 feet with 12.5 centimeter resolution data. So 12.5 centimeter resolution means each pixel represents 12.5 centimeters on the ground. We've got another lens that captures for the same resolution at 9,000 feet. So there's a crucial difference in the flying heights, which we'll come to later. All of our cameras capture 4 bands at the same time. So you've got the red, green, blue bands, and you've also got a near infrared band. Everything is captured at the same time. There's a very clever arrangement of lenses where you've got panchromatic lenses, which are stitched together. The panchromatic lenses capture the detail, and then they are stitched together to create the large footprint image, and then the color information is superimposed on top. The upshot of that is that you can output a number of different types of imagery from the same sensor. You can do a red, green, blue 4-band, or 4-band including the infrared, or color infrared, taking 3 of the 4 bands including the infrared. And it's all captured at the same time, which is very important for analysis of the data. Sitting underneath the camera, obviously you've got cameras in aircraft. Aircraft is a very unstable environment. It's moving around a lot. So we need something to dampen out the motion. So we have got a very sophisticated camera mount, which is gyrostabilized, and it compensates for the motion of the aircraft. So it keeps the camera as vertical to the ground as possible. And again, this is very important in aerial survey. What we're doing is taking a series of images of a very 3D lumpy surface, the Earth, stitching it all together and producing something in 2D, which is absolutely aligned to the mapping grid you're working to. So it needs to be very accurate. We've also got other systems as well. So not just the vertical photography, we also have a system for called an oblique camera, which takes, as well as the vertical straight down view, it's got 4 different cameras pointing at a 45-degree angle. This gives you extra information. It gives you building faces. So you can actually build up a much fuller model of the environment you're taking. And to take this one step further, we've also used hybrid systems. So including your vertical nadir sensor and your 4 oblique sensors, it's also got a laser sensor called a LiDAR. Now the LiDAR bounces a signal back off the Earth's surface and can produce a 3D model of the Earth's surface. So again, there's lots of systems out there for capturing data and capturing mass points of data. For the purpose of this, I'm going to concentrate on the vertical aerial photography, which is the bread and butter and what we use to do the national updates. So going back to the accuracy of the data, one of the most important things you need to know is where every photograph is taken. You need to have a precise location of the aircraft in the sky at that point. And what we do for this is we've got some very sophisticated GPS and navigation equipment. It's in 2 parts. So you've got a GPS on top of the aircraft, which records the X, Y, and position of the camera at the point of every exposure. The antenna is always taking triangulation readings from satellites in the air. So it's always got a very accurate fix of the position of the aircraft. The second part of the system, we've got an IMU, an inertial measurement unit. This is a set of gyroscopes in a little black box, and that measures the roll, pitch and yaw of the aircraft, which is very important. So if you think you've got an aircraft pointing vertically down, you're going to need to know the angle at which you're pointing at the Earth very, very precisely. And the IMU and the GPS have to be very precise measurements to make the data as accurate as possible. So this is a very important component of the system. So aircraft. I mean, there's a lot of survey aircraft out there, and this is just a couple of the ones we use. But typically you are wanting aircraft, especially for mass capture, you're wanting a good range on the aircraft. So 5 to 6 hours is pretty good. And again, we go back to our two flying heights. So we've got lenses that can fly at 19,000 feet, or we can fly at 9,000 feet. If you're up at 19,000 feet, you're going to need a pressurized aircraft, or you're going to have a crew on oxygen. So pressurized is much more preferable. Generally, for a lot of our work, the cruising rate is about 180 knots. So again, in choosing your aircraft, you're going to need to know what your requirements of the project are. So some projects have very specific requirements, might need a different aircraft. For example, we used with our hybrid system in the Netherlands last year, we needed to fly very, very low, down to 1,500 feet above the ground. For this, we actually needed to fly very slow. So you need specific aircraft if you need to fly low and you need to fly slow. So it's very important to choose your aircraft from the variety of survey aircraft that are out there. So capturing photography in the UK. So this is all about mass capture. If you think back to the contracts we've got for updating photography for the whole of the UK, so how do we do it? We've got a flying season in the UK that's between March and October. Now we tend to capture areas on a 3 to 5 year cycle, but that is now generally a 3-year cycle. And the increased efficiency of the camera technology is now enabling that. So generally for a lot of the contracts, target areas are determined by the ages of the existing imagery. And also you've got customer requirements. So how do we do? So once we've established what we need to fly for the year, we have to work with aeronautical charts to plan our flying. And as everyone knows, the UK airspace is incredibly busy. It's an incredibly dense airspace with a lot of restrictions on where you can go, restrictions on flying heights. For example, around London, a lot of the airspace, you've got the stacking zones for Heathrow and Gatwick at between 8,000 and 16,000 feet. Now, for a lot of aerial sensors and a lot of the resolutions you want to fly at to get the resolution data you want, you're going to be in that 8 to 16,000 feet zone, which makes access in the airspace very difficult. That is a huge problem. That is the principal reason why we bought a camera with a 210mm lens. It allows us to get up to 19,000 feet, which is above a lot of that traffic. It doesn't guarantee you get in there, but it gives you much more of a chance, and it has been pretty successful. See, whenever you're planning a project, you have to be very mindful, especially in the UK, of the airspace restrictions. So we use flight planning software to plan in our flight plan. We usually fly with east-west or north-south lines. Again, that can be determined by air traffic. We engage with them every year because there's always changes in the airspace, and they can advise us on what's preferable and what gives us the best chance of getting into the airspace. Now, the critical thing with the aerial photography is the overlap from each photograph to the next. The software shows the footprint of each photograph, and we need to check the overlap. For the purposes of a lot of the work we do, we fly over very large forward overlap, 80% overlap from one image to the next along a flight line, and a minimum of 30% from one flight line to the next. I'll get to why that is further in the talk when we're on production. But the overlap is critical, and it's a key thing in checking the flight plans. The flight plan creates what we'll call waypoints, which are little GPS triggers, which will trigger the camera in flight when you're in range of the target waypoint in the sky. So again, overlap is hugely important in aerial photography, and it's critical for data processing, and also influences things like the lean of buildings in the photography. If you plan at a certain flying height, if you fly higher than your planned flying height, you will increase your overlap, you'll decrease your resolution. If you fly lower than your intended flying height, you will decrease your overlap, and that could be problematic. So planning is important. So as I said, it's a very busy airspace. It's a hugely complex airspace, and we need to apply for permissions for all of the areas we fly in controlled airspace, which covers a lot of the country. To do this, we need to submit a non-standard flight application. So this is basically saying to air traffic control, we are going to be in this airspace for this length of time, doing these flight lines up and down. Now, the problem the airspace controllers have got is that most of the traffic in their airspace is civil airliners are going to be taking off from Heathrow and clearing the airspace within 10, 15 minutes. Whereas we're going to be hanging around for 4 hours in the same airspace, and it's the responsibility of the air traffic controller who's on duty to look after that aircraft, and they're going to be doing that for 4 hours. So there's a lot of reasons for them to say, no, sorry, our airspace is too busy, we can't accommodate you. But the first thing you have to do is get a permission for the whole of the season, which describes what you're doing, the flying heights you're at, the aircraft, all the details of the survey. But that actually doesn't give you permission to fly. That is an acceptance of the flight plan by NATS to say, yes, yeah, you can trigger your flight plan on the day of flight, but we still need to do that. On the day of flight, if you get good weather, we still need to activate our flight plan. And then it's up to the person in charge of the airspace at that time to say, yes, yeah, we'll let you in, or no, sorry, we're too busy. And also, we're going to be there for 4 hours, so at any point the airspace does get too busy, they could turn us around and say, sorry, you need to leave. You know, you can fly up until line 5 and then you need to go. It's a busy airspace, and, you know, this is can be an issue, but we work very closely with the air traffic authorities. We've worked with them for years, and they're very accommodating to survey aircraft. So we've got a pretty good relationship with them. So issues of capturing data, the main one probably in the UK is weather. If you're thinking we've got an update program where we want to capture, 50,000 up to 80,000 square kilometers a year, we need to take every opportunity we can to capture that data. We need absolutely clear skies, not like that photo at the top where you've got little clouds in. It needs to be clear blue skies, no clouds or shadows on the ground that will obscure any features. You think one of the main applications for the data is to update topographical mapping, so you do not want anything obscured on the ground. We also work to a sun angle. So most projects have requirements for the minimum sun angle for capture. This is typically 20 degrees. And this impacts how long capture can take place. So obviously, the lower the sun, and the longer the shadows, and the lower the image quality are for your data. Now, the 20-degree requirement is actually pretty standard in the UK and around the world. It's actually written down in the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors specifications, and most large contracts for the likes of the UK government for Ordnance Survey use 20-degree minimum as a standard. As I said, weather is always a challenge. So I put together a little sequence of the weather in the UK for the 2019 season. And as you run through the sequence, you can see how many days are pretty cloudy. So you do get, I mean, as we are at the moment, we're in a run of weather where, you know, it's pretty cloudy at the moment. We haven't really done anything for the last 2 weeks. It goes in fits and spurts. You might get 3 days and then you might get 2 weeks of nothing. So you need to maximise every opportunity, especially so in Scotland. I mean, Scotland is a real case in point where the survey opportunities are few and far between, so you really do need to maximise every opportunity. And we do tend to work north-south. If there is clear weather everywhere, we tend to go up to Scotland to absolutely make sure we get those opportunities to capture data. So data capture itself. So as I said, the aircraft endurance is approximately 5 to 6 hours. So assuming skies remain clear and air traffic can accommodate us, we'll aim to use the full endurance of the aircraft. If we're at this time of year, we're able to survey, the sun angle will allow us, to do 2 sorties in a day, refuel. And again, if we're talking about updating national data sets, you are going to want to maximize your capture all the time. That means going where the weather is going to allow you to do the most amount of capture. So if we want to go up to Scotland, we will be looking out for good wake breaks of weather in the Scotland, and we will go up to Scotland the day before if we see high pressure getting in. So we're based up locally to maximise capturing all of those weather opportunities. For Get Mapping, we tend to base in Oxford most of the time. That's where our flight operations are based. Which gives us good access to a lot of England. But if you want to go up to Scotland and we see weather coming, we will get up there the night before. So we are in Prestwick or in Aberdeen or even up in Wick to give us a good chance of getting those hard to get areas. And again, if we're in the south, and we've got areas to target around London, we will always try to get into the London airspace. Because again, that's the one that's difficult to access because of air traffic. So a lot of planning goes in and strategy goes into capturing these national data sets and updating them and knowing where to go, knowing where is difficult. So we've built up probably 15, 20 years of knowledge of doing this and knowing the airspace and the difficult areas that enables us to be successful in our capture programs. So in the aircraft, we've got a pilot. We've also got a camera operator. So the main role of the camera operator is to operate the sensor equipment and utilize the flight plans. And he's also responsible for communicating to the pilot. Now, the pilot is responsible for all the communications with any local air traffic, but the camera operator will communicate to the pilots to make sure that the correct lines are being flown and also verify real-time coverage and log things like clouds and any other things on the data. So that gives you a sort of first indication, a quality check while you're up in the aircraft. So going on to the second part of the talk, once we've been up flying, we've hopefully had a successful day of capture. We've come back down. We need to process the data. And this is the second half of the talk. So I'll probably introduce it by looking at the main products for our vertical aerial photography. So if you think back to our sensor, our sensors can capture in 4 bands. It's got a red, green, blue, and it's got an infrared band. So our principal products from that are 3 or 4 band orthorectified photography. What is orthorectified? Orthorectified is flattening your photographs of and warping them of a 3D surface onto a 2D map projection, for example, British Grid, so that your 2D photograph is exactly aligned to your mapping grid. And we also have two directly derived products, which is a terrain model and a surface model. So a surface model is a 3D model of the Earth's surface, including buildings, trees, anything that you can see. And then the terrain model is that surface model stripped of buildings and vegetation. It's called a bare earth model, which, as we'll see later, is very useful for things like flood modeling. Now, the DSM and DTM are directly derived from the photography during the production process. So you've got four important products. And then if you've got a DTM, I haven't shown it on the slide, you can actually automatically and very easily create contour data for mapping. So we've got quite a long production process that goes through quite a few stages, which we'll take you through fairly briefly. But if we're talking about our mass capture programs, national updates where you are pushing, upwards of 50,000, maybe 80,000 square kilometers a year through your production pipeline, we're averaging about 3 months to get all that data from capture to being made available to all the users. So there's quite a few stages it has to go through. There are initial cloud checking stages, which is usually done by the flight operations crew. So as soon as possible after your sortie, inevitably a lot of our flights you fly until you're stopped by cloud. So there is going to be cloud on the imagery you might need to refly. And then there's a whole series of other stages to get from a whole series of individual photographs of the Earth's surface to a orthorectified 2D photographic map of the Earth's surface that is aligned to your mapping grid. So spatial accuracy is very important. So the first part of processing is processing the GPS and IMU data. So if you remember, the GPS is giving you the XYZ position of the sensor at the time of capture, and the IMU is measuring your roll pitch and yaw. So you've got two streams of data, and these then are post-processed. So what we're looking for is data that's accurate as possible. So the GPS first, in the air, it's taking readings from satellites, and it gives you a certain degree of accuracy. What we can do post-flight is then post-process it using GPS base stations. Now, the Ordnance Survey maintain a series of base stations on the ground which give real-time, very, very accurate measurements for a precise grid of locations on the Earth's surface. And what we can do is triangulate our airborne GPS with the base stations to get an even more accurate fix of the GPS position of the sensor at the time of capture. And again, what we then need to do is merge the GPS information with the roll pitch yaw information from the IMU. And this is very important, as you can see from this illustration, that the direction that the sensor is pointing at the Earth is absolutely critical in working out how we're going to mosaic everything together. And it needs to be very accurate. We also have to calibrate everything. So, for example, the GPS antenna sits on the top of the aircraft. The camera is pointing out the bottom. When we take our GPS information, it needs to be from the focal center of the camera. So therefore we need to measure the difference between the focal center of the camera and the antenna's position on the top of the aircraft and factor that into our calculations. So this one illustrates that. So you've got a little diagram at the top where you've got your GPS antenna sitting on the roof of the aircraft, and you've got your IMU sensor and the IMU and the sensor at the bottom of the aircraft, and you need to measure what are called lever arms, which is the difference between the GPS and the camera sensor. We also need to absolutely calibrate the IMU, which measures the angles relative to the camera. So the IMU is a separate box of electronics to the actual camera itself. And what we can do is measure a thing called a boresight, which actually you can calculate the misalignment angles of the IMU with the camera itself. So it's just micro adjustments of accuracy So it's the sporting term, the law of the aggregation of marginal gains is really important here. It's all these tiny improvements in accuracy in all the different elements which make your data set as accurate as possible. So there's a very rigorous QA process of this stage of the processing to make sure everything is accurate. So we've got, once we've got our positional fix of each photograph, in parallel, we've got a series of photographs, and we need to do what's called radiometric correction. So radiometry is color balancing. So we are taking a series of images over maybe a large space of a large area of the ground, maybe 2,000 square kilometers. So the what's on the ground is going to change from sea to urban areas, bright buildings to dark forests, bright fields. And what we need to do is correct everything, because we are going to be merging and mosaicing all of these photographs together to make a homogeneous data set that aesthetically looks good and has all the information we need in it. It's not losing detail. So we haven't got burned out buildings, we haven't got dark areas, we're losing information in shadows. Now, again, the technology has advanced so much since we were scanning films back in the late 90s. And now the processing software has a lot of algorithms that can automate the color balancing to such an extent that the software can calculate from even the raw GPS. It can calculate, because it has a timestamp, it knows, for example, where the sun is in the sky relative to the aircraft, and it can factor that into the color balancing algorithms and corrects for any variations in brightness due to the position of the sun in the sky. So there's some very sophisticated algorithms going on for color balancing. So this illustrates, what it can do. On the left, there's an input where you've got quite a difference in terrain on the ground, and the input images are hugely differing in brightness because of the radiometric response to what's below. And then when you apply all of your color balancing algorithms, your output of all and again, we're still on individual images that we're going to be merging together. They're very, very even in color. So when you are going to be merging them together, there isn't any visible color change from image to image, which is very important. So the next stage of the process, so we've got our initial GPS, the GPS fix, and we've got the IMU position. These are the inputs into the next stage, which is aerial triangulation. What aerial triangulation is, it's taking all the photographs in our flight, which could be several thousands, and it's creating what are called tie points, which are common points which can be viewed on each image. And this is where our massive overlap is really important. So when it's creating all the tie points, it's got, again, more sophisticated software that can make absolute micro adjustments to the position of every image relative to every other image in the block of data, to even further improve our GPS accuracy of the imagery. And then on top of that, what we can do is add in ground control points. So I know it's a very complex diagram, but the green triangles represent what we call control points. And these are survey points. We'll go to the next slide. So survey points are known features that are in the imagery, which we can then measure on the ground with a GPS kit to very, very accurate levels. So we use typically white lines on roads or manhole covers, things like that, things that can be seen in the imagery. And then we can fix, so we can measure that, and this will give to the pixel, it will say that this pixel is within 2 to 3 centimeters of accuracy. That's what our ground-based GPS surveying kit can give us. If I go back to the previous slide, you can, when you've got that, and if you're thinking, so we're capturing a 12.5 centimeters resolution, we can, from the best possible GPS results, you can probably get 50 centimeter accuracy. if you introduce the ground control points, the more you introduce with known points with 2 centimeter accuracy, they'll actually influence the accuracy of the whole of the block and bring that down even lower to 30, 20 centimeters even, which is, hugely accurate data. We can get to now 2 pixel accuracy across your data set with the correct inputs and the right amount of ground control. So this is very important for your outputs when you're mosaicing all your images together. If you know they're going to be relative to each other, they're going to be centimeters, pixels accuracy, your mosaiced product is going to be very good. And again, this is an illustration of what it looks like. So if you've got a known survey point, so it's going to be a white line on the road, you can then locate it on the imagery. Now, we fly over very high overlaps. The higher the overlap, the more images you can locate the same feature on and tell it to give in 2 centimeter accuracy what that location is, the more accurate your overall block is going to be. So high overlap is critical in the accuracy of your data. The higher your overlap, the more accurate your data. Now, of course, there is a sweet spot is in anything. Now we are updating national data sets. So if we're thinking about our 50,000 to 80,000 square kilometers a year, we need to be mindful of how much we're flying. Flying is very expensive. So it's all about getting the right level of accuracy and then the right amount of flying. And it will vary depending on what you want your outputs to be. But for a lot of our national capture, we found that an 80% forward overlap and a 30% minimum side overlap gives you very good results, and also still is efficient for capture and enables you to capture that 50,000, 80,000 square kilometers a year that is needed to maintain national data sets. And then the next part of the processing, so we've done our aerial triangulation. It's worked out the position of every frame that you've taken relative to each other, very high accuracy. It's calculated tie points, all the common points on every image relative to all the ones around it. And this is a hugely dense data set. It's calculating millions and millions of matched pixels all across the data set. So for any points on the ground, any pixel, it's going to have a view from about 10, 12 different photographs from all angles. And what it can do, because it knows very accurately the XYZ position of each pixel from all different views, different angles, it can actually automatically create a 3D model. So with an awful lot of computer power thrown at it, with a high overlap, it can actually automatically create a digital surface model directly from the photography. And this is what it looked like. It's, again, it needs editing, so it's got artifacts, but it's a pretty good starting point as a surface model. And this is an automatic product of the production process. So typically we output it with one point every 25 centimeter. So if you've got a 2,000 square kilometer block of data, this is a massive data set and it's hugely useful. And then we come to auto rectification. So auto rectification is the draping and warping over the imagery over the terrain to flatten it to create a 2D image, and it flattens it to the chosen map projection. Now there's 2 ways of doing this. You can use a DSM, which includes trees, buildings, all other features, or you can use a DTM, which is the terrain model with all those features stripped bare. Now the DSM is going to give you an awful lot more information for when you do your warping process than the DTM. The upshot is that it will actually, for every point on your photography, and if you look at it on the right, it will actually choose the most vertical pixels it can and merge them all together to produce a truly vertical ortho photo. Whereas the DTM has less information to go on, so it's actually going to introduce building lean, and this is a very extreme example just for illustration, but if you are if you've got leaning buildings, you are going to be losing information. So we've got a flow line that uses the DSM to orthorectify and flatten the data. And the upshot of that is a very valuable data set because it shows a lot more detail. This is particularly useful for when you're doing mapping updates. So you've got all the vertical data on the ground. And again, to do this, you need a lot of overlap. You need your 80% forward overlap, and you need a minimum of 30%. And again, probably in really high urban areas, if you fly with a higher side lap, if you've got a 60% side overlap, you're going to get an even more accurate DSM. But again, that's twice the amount flying. And then finally, so once you've got your orthorectified tiles, which are 2D, they all need to be merged together. And then we tend to chop them up into 1 kilometre tile. So now they are absolutely aligned to the British grid or whichever coordinate system you're using. And we also have a process, so if you are updating a national data set, you are going to have different dates of flying and the terrain changes on the ground. So we are flying between April and October. We're flying over multiple years. So there is a process where we do match in the data to run the different dates of photography. So it's a seamless data set. So you run the edges around natural features like fields. And then once we got that, we got a data set. Our data set typically comes in 1 kilometre tiles, 1 by 1 kilometre, aligned to the OS grid in the UK. And then we can serve that up in a number of formats, TIFF, JPEG, and ECW, or the compressed formats. And that's what goes out to customers. So going again to the core products that we produce from photography. So we've got a number of them. So again, I'm talking about our national data sets, our update programs. So for the UK, we are updating the whole of the UK at 25 centimetre resolution, and we are updating the most of England, the urban areas of Wales and the urban areas of Scotland, 12.5 centimetres. So we've got about 60% of the country, it's 12.5 centimetres. And then we've got our digital service model, our contours. And then we also produce metadata. Metadata is the information about the dates of capture of the photography, which is very important. So again, we've got our RGB and our CIR, and also obviously we've got our 4-band imagery. Everything is produced in 4-band, and then we can split out our RGB and our CIR from that. So the infrared and the color bands are captured and produced at exactly the same times. They are absolutely contemporaneous. And again, yeah, we can do the same with 4-band. And again, some more illustrations. We are now producing true orthos using the DSM, which are, you know, true vertical orthos to reveal all that information on the ground. And again, we've got our DSM. So the DSM is a product. So we take our raw 25 centimetre surface model and we do some editing. The editing is usually to flatten out water, which will have a lot of noise from the production process. And then there's also artifacts and noise from things like solar farms and sometimes forests. So we do some editing to make the DSM a true representation of the Earth's surface. And then that has got a lot of applications. And then we, from there, we can create a DTM, which is a hugely important data set on its own. So it's a terrain model, as known as a bare earth model. And it has all the buildings and vegetation removed. And this is a semi-automated, but there's also manual editing process in 3D. And it's got an awful lot of applications, principally flood modeling. So it's a hugely valuable data set for flood modeling and our environmental impact studies. And then if you've got a DTM, you can use that to superimpose your aerial photography, and you can create 3D fly-throughs as well, and visualization. So it's a hugely powerful tool. And of course, if you've got a DTM, you can add a click of a button, create contours. And then I've got a few slides on the last step of the chain. So we've flown our data, we've produced all our products, and and then we need to get them to the customers. And as I mentioned at the beginning, we've long been pioneers of web services, managed data services, streaming the data over the web and selling it online. So we were pioneers of the WMS systems. WMS is a web mapping service, which basically is streaming the data from our data set onto your computer. And we started doing this 15 years ago when bandwidths were very low. So therefore, we've got a very, very, very fast WMS service, which can handle a lot of users. And we are serving up increasingly our data to our government users and non-central government users, county councils, through the WMS. And the benefit of that is that they don't receive physical data, they get the updates automatically. So we update everything onto our data servers, and then it's automatically updating people's web feeds. So it's a really useful tool for getting the data to the customer at low cost to the user. And we can do all of our products. And again, if you've got your GIS information, you've got your aerial photography streamed to your desktop, you can open up in your application and it's exactly aligned to your mapping. So you've got your mapping layers, you've got your DSM and DTM layers, and you've got your photography layers, all aligned and all in the same software package, which is hugely powerful. And if that can be streamed, people don't have to worry about handling data sets on hard drives and DVDs and USB sticks. And it's all automatically updated. So that is a hugely important part of the process. So once we've captured our photography and produced it, we've got a whole process of publishing it to our data center to make it available to our customers. And then just to wrap up for the last few minutes, I've got a few slides on what are the uses of our photography. Probably one of the most important is map mapping. I mean, not just the Ordnance Survey. We've been working with the Ordnance Survey for 15 years, and for them, aerial photography is a huge part in updating what is called their master map, which is their base reference map layer, which is used to update all their topographical maps. So mapping is all about mapping change, and it's a dynamic country and it's changing all the time. So change needs to be mapped, and on a national scale, the best way to do that is capturing aerial photography. Map making is one big thing that drives the requirements for the frequency of updates of photography. And again, it's similar. It's change detection. And another one, to give you an example, this is the London Olympic Stadium, taken probably over successive years. Again, showing the level of change and big infrastructure projects, which need to be mapped and modelled. And again, the best way to do that is photography. And then again, we've got large data sets, and we sell to government and non-government customers all over the country. And a lot of them use it for infrastructure planning, managing their assets. One of the biggest drivers has been the Rural Payments Agency. So they use photography to help analyse farm subsidy claims. So the farmers need to make a claim for what they're growing and the area of their crops. And this can be done by them logging in and digitizing their farms using the aerial photographic data. Now, the Rural Payments Agency, to analyse their claims, need the most recent intelligence available, which is another thing that drives having an update program, especially of fields. That always changes. The size of field and what's growing always changes. So people like the RPA do need, a 3-year update program to give them the intelligence to map all the changes that are down there. So again, it's all about mass capture for these applications and the mapping of change. And again, there's new technologies coming in as well. So looking at the fusion of the DTM, the surface model, and our high quality photography, you're getting into 3D modeling and simulation software applications. And this is a hugely important growth. And the phrase that is going about now are digital twins, which are hyper accurate virtual models of the real world. And aerial photography is only one component of that, but the derived products like a very high quality digital surface model combined with high quality aerial photography gives you some of the inputs for creating very accurate and detailed 3D models of cities, which is an increasingly useful planning and visualization tool. And again, if you've got highly accurate 3D data with photography, you can do things like, it's the siting of masts for the 5G infrastructure. That's another growth, and there's a huge amount of potential in telecoms. So there's all these new technologies that are using geospatial data, and the trend is for higher resolution, higher accuracy in these areas. So again, alongside our mass capture, we need to be looking at also hyper detailed surveys of cities as well for these type of applications. And again, we've got uses in archaeology as well. So in 2018, there's that hugely long dry summer, and there's a lot of stories in the media where the dryness of the ground revealed old archaeological sites which were seen from the air. So again, there's a lot of uses of the data in things like archaeology. We sell data to the British Geological Survey for fault mapping. So there's a lot of applications there as well. And just to wrap up, so for GEA mapping, we've got a huge variety of customers. Probably the core is central and local government, but we also sell to the emergency services and all ranges of the economy. So it's quite a broad range of people who are increasingly using geospatial data. It's going to be ever more important in the coming years. So that pretty much wraps it up. It's a very quick run through of quite a few ranges of topics. Thank you for listening. And if you have any more questions, feel free to contact me after this, but I will take questions now for the next 15, 20 minutes. So thank you.
Thank you very much, David. That was a really good tour of the two halves of your operation. Colin, are you there? Just pause a moment while we're sorting out the technology. So while we're waiting, David, the audience has been typing away and entering lots of questions. You probably haven't had opportunity to look at those while you've been talking, but one that just came to my mind, what's the difference between what you're doing and Google Earth? Is it the same thing, or are they doing something different?
Probably a very important question, because Google, it's kind of hard to know everything that Google are doing. I mean, initially their business model was they weren't creating any data themselves. They were just buying it piecemeal off the shelf from whichever suppliers they could do deals with and cobbling it together. So it was a real mixed bag of good data and bad data sort of matched all together. So it wasn't bespoke at all. I think for a lot of it, I don't know now, but the metadata, the accuracy of dates wasn't that great. It was certainly variable. But they have, and at the moment, they have obviously got some really, really interesting data in there. They've got very good data over London. So it's a real mixed bag. So some of what they're doing is similar, but it's very variable depending on where you go. So I think on a national level, if you take in the UK, what we're doing is absolutely consistent to the same processing standards with the same sensors across the UK, wherever you are, whereas I think Google is very variable. So in London, you probably get a really good data set, but probably elsewhere, could be quite old. Not that, you wouldn't absolutely know the accuracy of the dates of capture.
That's interesting. I think you may need to stop sharing your screen.
Yep.
Thank you.
Hey, yes, that's great.
Okay.
So at this point, Michael, are you there too?
Yes. Yeah. Okay, so I've been keeping an eye on some of the Q&A section and trying to draw out some of the, we obviously can't answer all, but I'll try and draw out some of the themes of the questions. So one that we've obviously had quite a few on is how has, it's been in the media, but less pollution, far fewer planes in the sky over the last few months. How has that made a difference to your organisation and the quality of images and the operations you can run?
It has been useful, actually. I must admit. Yep. It's been a very unusual 2 months. So the skies have been really open. So it's not been a typical year. It has helped us hugely. I wouldn't say we've had the skies to ourselves, but it's made life a lot easier. And I think we are still processing the data from 2020, but I imagine the data quality is going to be very good as well. Where are we now? 17th of June, we have already captured so for our 3-year data update program for the whole of the UK, we had about 99,000 square kilometres to capture, which is a lot because we had a bad year last year because of weather. We've done about 80% of that, which is unprecedented. So yes, it's been good. And it's been, largely, we've had really good weather, but we've had a lot of help from air traffic. It hasn't been an issue at all.
Coming in with another one, do you see that there'll be a day when satellites will take over from what you're doing with aeroplanes at the moment? Perhaps not with the satellites of today, but when you think about the plans by Elon Musk to put hundreds and hundreds of tiny satellites in the sky, would that not make eventually what you're doing somewhat obsolescent?
Absolutely, yeah. I think we've always thought that. I think that it's going to get there, certainly. There are interesting hybrid solutions out there. Ordnance Survey are developing, they bought a company in the West Country and they are developing a solar-powered aircraft which can stay up in the sky for 90 days at about 70,000 feet, which is kind of halfway between satellites and our aerophotographic solutions. So there are ideas out there as well. I mean, obviously, satellite technology is going to get better and better, and it's how affordable it's going to be. That's the key. And once it becomes affordable and can compete in price for photography, you'll use satellite. But it's not there yet. But it will, absolutely. For companies like that, we need to be aware of that maybe satellite in the end will take over the mass capture part of it, and then we're going to look towards the more detailed, very hyper detailed surveys of cities. It might change what we do, certainly.
But you plan on being there?
Sorry, absolutely, yeah. We're always adapting. So absolutely.
And certainly interesting to understand from your talk that there's two halves of the business: the capturing of the images and then the processing. So I guess the processing bit will be common no matter where the source of the image is. Absolutely, yeah. I mean, it will be satellite might require different processing flow line that there'll be processing to do. So certainly, there is two halves of the business. You're right.
Great. I'll come in with one now. It's more sort of follows on from that. So there seem to be a lot of skills within the organisation from that sort of aviation all the way through to post-processing. If you could describe possibly maybe your own sort of journey into the industry from a sort of aspiring young engineer perspective, and also the sort of paths that other people might take into other roles within the industry.
Okay, well, I started doing image processing actually. So yeah, I joined 2005, just after Get Mapping purchased the first digital camera system. I kind of learned on the job actually of doing image processing, and we were all quite new to it. It was all taking up new technology. There was quite a bit of knowledge in the company about geospatial, because a lot of people came from a satellite background who'd come out of the National Remote Sensing Centre. But I came into it just doing general IT stuff, and kind of I learned, and we all learned together very early on about. I started with image processing, and I went from there to do a bit of the aerial survey work. I did then a bit of the ground survey work. So I sort of covered a few bits of the business, and then I kind of stepped up from that to sort of starting overseeing all that, and then sort of overseeing the whole of production and flight ops. So that was sort of my journey. But we've had people join us from we have had people from a GIS background. We've had people from a non-GIS background come in and learn with us. So it's quite a variety of backgrounds. It's quite a niche industry. It's quite specific. So sometimes not necessarily something you're going to learn elsewhere than the intricacies of it. So we had a variety of backgrounds in the company.
But I guess these days, the tools to do imaging processing, even down to basic desktop computers, are quite powerful these days. So I guess if people wanted to try, maybe not with exactly the kind of technology you're using, but certainly the basic skills of image processing, it is more accessible now than it's ever been.
Absolutely. I mean, we use a lot of open source software. There's a really powerful software called QGIS, which is it's downloadable for free, open source, and it's got huge potential. And a lot of people are using that to create their own code, create their own maps. There's a lot of potential out there for that sort of thing.
There's a few people that have raised the question: have you discovered any otherwise unknown Roman forts or other archaeological artifacts that weren't obvious from the ground, but you've spotted them as a result of the aerial work that you're doing?
Not that I'm aware of, actually. No, nothing that's new. I think, yes, I guess the only example similar would be 2018, where there were, I guess it wasn't, but the stuff that was known, it was really high quality imagery of archaeological features in fields, which had been revealed by the dryness of all the fields in 2018. But it wasn't stuff that was unknown. It's just the quality of imagery of it was better than before.
And you're surprised when you repeat your trips after 3 years, how much better the quality of what you're looking at has got?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think this year is going to be interesting, actually, because the quality of photography is not always the same from year to year, and that's largely down to things like air pollution. We've always found photographing London, it's really hard to get a good data set because of the quality of the air. It'd be interesting to see how the photography is this year in comparison. I mean, there might be a difference, because Yes, the technology is improving in terms of efficiency of capture. I think the technology is improving in production techniques, but things like air quality, which do influence the quality of the photography, is going the other way. It's not quite as simple as it. Image quality improving year on year. I'm hoping this year is going to be different.
Great.
David, could I ask a quick question? Have you, or are you going to have any dealings with LiDAR equipment?
Yes, we are. So we operate, and we have done for quite a few years, we've operated a LiDAR system in South Africa. So we've got our production team are based in Cape Town, but we also have operations team in South Africa as well. So we've got a flying unit down there who operate out of Centurion. They have been operating LiDAR for years. They've got a very strong record. They do a lot of surveys of power lines and mining and mines in South Africa. And it is why one of the plans for this year was to bring the LiDAR over to the UK. We still want to, but we've been scuppered a bit by the lockdown in South Africa and not be able to get equipment over here. But it has been a long ambition to set up and fly LiDAR in the UK. So we still want to do that. We still will, but quite when, we're not sure.
Thank you.
David, another question was asked was, are there any sites that you can't actually photograph, you're not allowed to photograph, such as military bases, other government sites? It was noticed that you did have RAF Odiham up there as an example, I think. But is there any sites that you're not allowed to, one, either photograph, or two, publish?
No, it's all open. So basically, when we did the Millennium Map back in 1999, we went through this whole process. This is before my time, I can't remember whether it went to court or it was decided with the government that they said, yeah, it's fine. You could, everything is open, because I think they were looking at places like Aldermaston and Portland Down and places like that. And it was decided it was fine. Not the case in other countries. I remember us doing some work in Spain and Portugal, and there were certain military sites in those countries at that time, this is about 10 years ago, which we had to black out of the imagery. So that's certainly true in other countries. In the UK, no, it's fine, anything goes. Although I don't think everything is still on OS Maps, is it? So I don't think. I think you've still got blank spaces and stuff on some of the sites in Ordnance Survey maps. But for our photography, which is out in the public domain, it's all there.
I guess getting access to fly over military bases and other prohibited zones is perhaps quite an inhibitor. And sort of taking that theme on, do you have specially qualified pilots who are able to go in very straight lines, or is that something that's done by autopilot?
No, it has to be the pilot. I mean, it's a very skilled job. It's it's a very specific discipline, because you need to keep your aircraft within, it varies, but say a sort of a 70 to 100 meter wide corridor, at the same height, at the right speed. So it is a pretty skilled discipline, and you're doing it for 5 or 6 hours. So yes, it is pretty specialist area of the industry. You need specialist survey pilots and experienced ones.
And usually more than one pilot at a time?
No, usually just one. So I mean, it's obviously you've got to be mindful of regulations on duty hours, but the typical setup, you'll have one pilot doing your 6 hour sortie and one camera operator. And of course, if you've got a really good spell of weather, you probably want to organise it so you've got a second pilot to take over. And again, that's all come down to pilot's duty hours. But one pilot in the plane at a time, generally.
So I guess as you're spanning many hours and the clouds will go over, and all sorts of other artifacts. So when I look at Street View on Google, you can turn the camera around and see something completely different to facing the opposite direction. Not really a problem for Street View in a public service, but when you're trying to make everything uniform, how do you deal with the problem of something changing between different passes of the aircraft?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it can handle things like the changes in position on cars in the ground on a road. It's not going to mess up the algorithms. I think it can cause. There are certain things that it doesn't like. It doesn't like. So yeah, water. It can't triangulate water. If that's going to be moving from image to image and too much for the software to handle, it will just throw up a massive noise. So if we've got our surface model, it will it will just throw it into chaos. That's why we have to edit it. Solar farms. We have instances where if you're flying over a forest and the wind is blowing in the trees, that can actually do enough to sort of create enough interference to sort of mess up the algorithms. But things like cars aren't generally a problem. It will take, I think they're distinct enough in each image, it will be able to sort of take either the car from that image or the car from the next image and be able to, it'll just choose one of them. That's not a problem. So it's only in very specific examples, mainly water, where it can cause some issues. But again, because it's water, it's not such an issue. You can edit it out and do some post-editing to sort of correct water areas, and which are not probably the main need for your photography. You're needing things on land.
David, you haven't talked about the volumes of raw data that you're collecting, and also the post-processed data volumes. Can you maybe explain a little bit more about what sort of volumes are we talking about, and also where do you store the data?
Yep. Okay, so it's a lot of data. For the latest camera systems, each image is about 1.8 gigabytes. We would typically capture in, if you have a really good 4 hour mission, you could probably capture maybe 2,000 or 3,000 images, which would cover about 2,000 square kilometers, 12.5 centimeter resolution. So your 2,000 to 3,000 images could be up to between 4 and 5 terabytes of data. So that's your raw data for a good day's flying, 4 to 5 terabytes. And then that produces in itself maybe 10 terabytes of intermediate data while you're doing the processing. And then your final product sort of depend on the formats of the data, but you're probably looking at, for all of the possible formats, you're looking at maybe 500 megabytes per square kilometer. So it's a lot of data. We have got for processing. So the camera storage is all solid state storage. So the camera will store, I think it's about, each data pack is about 4 terabytes of data. And we'll carry, 2 or 3 of them on board. So that's solid state storage. That gets uploaded to a server. We've got 800 terabytes of storage on our production servers, and they're obviously also backed up. So yeah, you're looking at huge volumes of data. And then we are backing everything up on typically on hard drives.
I mean, another question linked to that is, do you use historical data? Because you have 3-year survey cycles, don't you? Do you use any of the historical data, or is that discarded? Or
no, it's so we yes, it's always used. It's useful for change detection, and obviously the prime use is the most recently available. But and again, the beauty with streaming data over the web, that we will have a data layer for every layer, a data layer for every year that we've captured in a certain location. So if you open up a location on our web service, you can there'll be a data layer for 2019, and then 2016 one, 2013 one, etc. So everything is accessible. We have a very large database, so everything is organised in years. I think the historical data is a hugely valuable resource. So on our web shop, we've got data going back to 1999. So it's useful for tracking change. There are lots of applications for that.
Have we got one last question, Michael?
Yes, so just one final one. We've had a question here of, have you had any issues with sort of enterprising advertising agencies taking advantage of roof space or any sort of space on top of their properties to do ambush marketing?
No. Is this straight? Not that I'm aware of. Maybe I'm going to have to start looking at the data to check.
Sounds like a good opportunity, mate. I'll see what's on top of my building.
Yes.
Well, I think that's a good point to bring the questions to the end. Just to reassure everyone that's watching, and there are about 160 people watching the webinar this evening. We did see all of your questions, and Michael and Samantha tried to group together and summarise the themes of questions that were asked. So if the exact wording of your question wasn't asked today, we certainly saw it and tried to get through as many and varied topics as we could. So thank you very much for David for fielding those questions, all unannounced. And I think that was a very good round off to an interesting discussion, and particularly learning about the two sides of aerial mapping, the capturing of the images, and some interesting ways of doing that, not just visually, but also infrared and radar. And then moving that into, we've just heard, some massive data sets processed in South Africa, using some open source software, and the final result is something that probably all the hard work would belie the simplicity of what you see. So on that note, I would like, on behalf of everyone who's watching today, to thank David very much for taking the trouble to come along and explain what he's been working on. And on that note, I'd just like to thank everybody for tuning in, and we hope to see you next time.